Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into adult ADHD.
Yeah, what it actually looks like,
Yeah,
how people get diagnosed, or often don't.
exactly. And, what helps people navigate it? We've got a couple of great sources.
hmm
First is ADHD in Adults, a guide for successfully living with ADHD. It's this educational booklet.
Right, from the ADHD Foundation, funded by Takeda, seems very practical, aimed at adults themselves.
Totally. For people with ADHD or even just exploring it. And then we have something a bit different.
The research report.
Yeah, barriers to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder diagnosis in adults. This one's from Mathematica for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
So that's more about the system, the problems with diagnosis.
Precisely. Why it's underdiagnosed, the hurdles involved.
Yeah.
So our goal here is to pull out the really key insights, maybe some surprising stuff too.
Give you that clearer picture without getting bogged down in, excessive detail.
Right. So let's start with the basics. What is adult ADHD? The Takeda Guide talks about those core things.
Inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. The classic trio.
Then it goes beyond that, right? It
Mhm.
really emphasizes emotional regulation difficulties
Mhm.
and executive function challenges.
Which are huge for adults, absolutely huge. We think we know inattention.
That is zoning out.
Yeah, but it's more, isn't it? Like missing key details constantly, struggling to follow conversations even one-on-one, maybe not quite getting instructions.
And hyperactivity in adults. It's not usually bouncing off walls.
No, it's often more internal, like that feeling of restlessness, can't relax, always needing to be doing something.
Or impulsivity, interrupting people a lot, maybe saying things you wish you hadn't.
Exactly. But the crucial point the guide makes is, well, everyone does these things sometimes.
Right.
But for someone with ADHD, it's like way more pronounced, more extreme, and it's been there, usually, since childhood in some form.
It's not something that just suddenly appears in your 30s.
No, it's a lifelong thing, but how it looks can change.
Yeah.
What was maybe obvious physical energy as a kid becomes that inner restlessness as an adult.
And the guide has some self-assessment questions. Like, do you struggle to focus when someone's talking to you? Do you lose track of time often?
Yeah, but it's not just about ticking boxes, is it?
No, definitely not. The guide really stresses it's the consistency. How regular is this stuff?
Yeah.
And is it actually causing problems in your life? That's the key.
It's the pattern. And those other aspects you mentioned.
The emotional dysregulation.
Yeah, like really intense reactions to criticism or finding it super hard to manage frustration or anger.
And the executive function bit. Sounds technical, but it's basically your brain's management system, right?
Totally. Planning, organizing, controlling attention, controlling impulses.
Emotional control, shifting between tasks, even just starting a task. Working memory, too.
And when those are shaky, as the guide points out, you see the everyday stuff. Losing things all the time, struggling to problem solve on the fly, procrastinating.
Just feeling disorganized. That paints a much broader picture than just, can't sit still.
Definitely. So, okay, if it has such a big impact, why are so many adults undiagnosed?
That's where the Mathematica report comes in. It really dives into this underdiagnosis issue. Historically, it was seen as a kid thing, right?
Mostly a boy thing focused on hyperactivity.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which meant adults were often missed, and especially women or girls whose ADHD looked different, more inattentive.
And even now, with more awareness, the report cites estimates like 75 to 80% of adults in the U.S. with ADHD might still be undiagnosed.
Wow, 75 to 80%. That's staggering.
It really is. And it brings up that gender point again. Boys diagnosed more in childhood.
But in adulthood,
It flips. More women actually seek and get treatment.
that is quite a switch. Why is that, according to the report?
Well, a couple of possibilities floated by the experts they talked to. One is maybe women are just generally more likely to seek healthcare. Plausible.
Okay.
But the other idea is really interesting. Maybe the women who were missed as kids, the ones with the less disruptive, inattentive symptoms.
They're finally getting diagnosed later.
Exactly. It's like a delayed catch-up. They've struggled silently maybe and are now getting answers.
So that image of the hyperactive boy is really incomplete.
Very. And the report also mentions racial and ethnic disparities, though it admits the data is kind of lacking there.
But the experts suspected things like stigma, cultural views on mental health.
Language barriers, definitely. Access to good providers, having good insurance, all those systemic issues likely play a role too.
Okay, so we know it presents differently. We know it's underdiagnosed. What are the actual roadblocks people hit when they try to get diagnosed as adults. The Mathematica report dug into this, right? Talking to experts and people who've lived it.
Yeah, and a big one, maybe unsurprisingly, is just lack of knowledge. People not recognizing their own struggles as ADHD symptoms.
Because their idea of ADHD is still stuck on the childhood model.
Probably. Or they just think, oh, I'm just bad at X, or I'm just lazy, or whatever. Plus, you add in the stigma around mental health generally.
Makes people hesitant to even ask.
Right, or fear of being judged.
And here's a cruel irony the report mentions. The symptoms themselves can get in the way.
How so?
Well, if you struggle with organization, planning, time management, navigating the whole process of finding a doctor, making appointments, filling out forms, following up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that process can be overwhelming even without ADHD.
Exactly. The condition itself creates barriers to getting help for the condition. It's tough.
And then there's the provider side of things, lack of knowledge there too.
A major issue highlighted in the report, many providers, their training was mostly on childhood ADHD.
So they might not think of it in an adult presenting with, say, anxiety symptoms.
Or they might dismiss the patient's concerns. And get this, the report states there are actually no official U.S. guidelines specifically for diagnosing adults.
No guidelines. That seems like a pretty big gap.
Yeah, leads to inconsistencies, you'd imagine. And it can mean providers lean too heavily on other diagnoses.
Like anxiety or depression, because symptoms overlap.
Exactly. Difficulty concentrating, restlessness.
Yeah.
Could be seen as just anxiety. So they treat the anxiety, but maybe miss the underlying ADHD that's contributing.
They stopped digging too soon.
Right. And the report also touches on some, frankly, worrying provider attitudes.
Like what?
Skepticism about adult diagnosis.
Yeah.
Why wasn't this caught sooner? Or not seeing it as a real medical problem in adults.
Oh, dear.
Gender bias, too, attributing a woman's symptoms to just being emotional or hormones instead of considering ADHD.
Wow.
And even suspicion of drug seeking if a patient brings up ADHD, which is just awful for someone genuinely seeking help.
That really puts the onus on finding the right provider, someone knowledgeable and open-minded.
Totally. And then you have the practical stuff. Just finding a specialist who deals with adult ADHD could be hard.
Long waiting lists.
Yeah, the report mentioned people waiting months, like 2 to 8 months sometimes.
Oof.
Plus insurance hassles, high out-of-pocket costs.
Sure.
Evaluations can run from like $400 to $2,000, sometimes even more.
Making it inaccessible for a lot of people.
Definitely. And one more barrier that really jumped out from the report.
Go on.
This thing about neuropsychological testing. People with lived experience often said they had to get it done.
Okay. Like extensive cognitive tests.
Yeah. But the experts interviewed for the report, they mostly agreed it's not actually necessary for most adult ADHD diagnoses.
Really? But it's often required.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
And it adds a huge barrier cost, time commitment.
For something the experts think isn't usually needed, that's frustrating.
It really is. Okay, so it can be a real uphill battle. But what helps? What gets people through that process? The report looked at facilitators, too.
Well, knowledge is power, right? So increase personal understanding, people doing their own research.
Finding info online, social media, podcasts.
Yeah, hearing other people's stories and going, wait, that sounds like me. That empowers them to self-advocate with doctors.
Makes sense. And having support helps, too.
Oh, definitely. The report stressed supportive family, friends, partners, people, encouraging them, validating their struggles. That makes a huge difference.
And finding a good provider, obviously. Someone who actually listens.
Critical. Someone validating, not dismissive.
And you also just need persistence, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Personal determination. Because it often isn't easy or quick. You have to keep pushing sometimes.
And the report mentioned telehealth as a positive.
Yeah, seems like it's really helped. Makes it more accessible, more convenient. Maybe appointments are quicker to get sometimes.
And maybe easier to talk about sensitive stuff from your own home?
Could be. Seems like telehealth has potential to lower some of those barriers we talked about.
Okay, so that's the journey to diagnosis. Now, what about after? Or just managing day to day? That Takeda guide seems focused on that living successfully.
Exactly. It's full of practical strategies like managing your environment.
How so?
Simple stuff sometimes. Reducing distractions at work, moving your desk, using noise-canceling headphones, maybe website blockers on your computer.
Makes sense. And for sleep, too.
Yeah, creating a good sleep space. Dark room, comfy temperature, maybe storing stuff out of sight so it's less visually cluttered or distracting.
Little things that can add up.
Yeah.
And it talks about healthy habits, too.
Mm-hmm. Staying hydrated, especially important first thing. Eating balanced meals, getting enough protein, maybe cutting back on super sugary or fatty foods that can mess with focus.
Practical tips like having healthy snacks on hand, planning meals.
Yeah, planning helps combat impulsivity around food, you know? Less likely to just grab whatever's easiest or most tempting.
Okay. And then developing coping skills and routines. That sounds key.
Super key. Like actively identifying things that help you relax and actually scheduling them in, making relaxation a routine, not an afterthought.
Using reminders too. Calendars, phone alerts.
Essential for staying on top of tasks and appointments. Visual aids can be really helpful. And in relationships, the guide suggests things like
Like what?
dividing up chores clearly, reviewing them regularly, and maybe having agreed upon rules for when emotions run high.
Like taking a break before discussing something intense.
Yeah, exactly. Pre-agreed strategies.
And seeking support is another big theme in the
Well,
guide.
absolutely. Considering things like ADHD coaching for practical skills or therapy with someone who gets ADHD.
Building a support network. Like a trusted friend for honest feedback.
Yeah, that critical friend idea. And just communicating openly with loved ones about the challenges, asking for their understanding.
It's not just about individual strategies, but also leaning on others.
Right. Now, that other source, the psychology review on workplace stuff, it touched on treatments more broadly, too.
What did it say?
Well, it noted medication is often the first line approach, after trying environmental tweaks and strategies.
But not the only approach.
No, it highlighted psychosocial interventions, therapy, coaching, skills training, especially for people who don't want meds or have issues taking them or find meds aren't enough on their own.
And what about the workplace specifically? Did the review find clear answers on what works best there?
Sort of. It said research on specific workplace modifications or how different interventions directly impact work outcomes.
Hmm.
Well, it's still a bit limited. We need more research there.
Okay.
But it did find that studies combining meds and psychosocial support seem to show positive results for work functioning, like helping people stay employed.
So a combined approach might be particularly beneficial for work challenges.
Seems that way. Suggests tackling it from multiple angles is often best.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've seen adult ADHD is, well, complex, often looks different from childhood ADHD.
Hugely underdiagnosed because of history, lack of awareness, actual systemic barriers.
Right. And getting diagnosed often takes knowledge, self-advocacy, support, persistence, and maybe a bit of luck finding the right provider.
And living well with it involves really practical stuff, managing your environment, habits, routines, and seeking the right kind of support.
For me, a couple of real aha moments were that gender flip, more women treated in adulthood.
Suggesting those missed childhood diagnoses are surfacing.
Yeah. And the expert consensus against routine neuropsych testing being necessary. That feels like a really important point about removing barriers.
Definitely. And while we've covered a lot, this is really just scratching the surface, isn't it? There's so much more, especially around personalized strategies.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you listening. Given everything we've discussed, the impact of undiagnosed ADHD, the barriers, what big shifts do you think need to happen?
In healthcare, maybe education, even just how society views it all.
Yeah. What needs to change so adults can get timely, accurate diagnoses and the support they actually need?
It's a big question, worth reflecting on, maybe based on your own experiences or what you've seen.
What other questions does this raise for you? Something to think about.